Professor Haney Lopez, it is a real pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, I'm delighted to be in conversation with you. Really looking forward to it.
Likewise, likewise. Let's start by first unpacking for the audience. What is it that we mean when we use the phrase dog whistle politics and another phrase coded political racism? What do those two concepts mean?
Yeah, great questions. Let me start this way. A lot of people understand dog whistle politics just to mean coded speech. And that's a terrible mistake, but it's very common. So you'll hear somebody say, when George W. Bush talked about wonder working powers, or when Barack Obama invoked sort of phrasing from Martin Luther King, or we shall overcome, that these are examples of dog whistle politics because they're coded, they have a particular resonance for specific target audiences. So wrong. That's just retail politics. Retail politics is talking in the ways that help you connect with your base. That's not dog whistle politics. The evil core of dog whistle politics is to attempt to trigger ugly social hierarchies. And often it's racism. We can talk about dog whistle racism as a specific version of this. It could be around gender and patriarchy. It could be around homophobia. It could be around religion. The point is, dog whistle politics is a form of demagoguery. It's a form of triggering ugly social stereotypes. And now here's the dog whistle part, while simultaneously using language that allows the speaker and the mobilized audience to deny that they're engaging in a form of hatred. Right? And so let me give you an example. This will make it clear. Welfare queen or criminally legal alien.
Yeah.
These phrases trigger ugly racist stereotypes. They trigger unconscious, deeply pervasive stereotypes in our society. But then when somebody turns around and says, hey, that's racist, the politician can say, what are you talking about? I never mentioned the word race. I didn't talk about biology. I didn't talk about blood. I didn't talk about racial groups. I just said criminally legal alien. I just said welfare queen. Right. And then the audience the mobilized audience says to themselves, what do you mean? I'm just opposed to people ripping off the welfare system. What do you mean racist? I'm just opposed to people who cut in line. I want people to follow the rules. And so that's dog whistle politics. And to put it really succinctly, the simultaneous stoking of ugly racial hatreds while denying that that's what's happening at all.
How is something like that able to be combated against effectively? We're seeing it across so many different arenas right now. We've seen it really increasing, at least publicly acknowledging of its increasing since 2016. Is there an effective way to combat this? Because I see it's extraordinarily effective. It allows people to traffic in racism without, as you said, really having to face any consequences for that. And it doesn't seem to me like our broader political discourse has figured out how to grapple with this in any real meaningful way.
So I want to come back to, is there an effective response to this? Yes, there is. Yes, there is. But I want to hold it for a second because I want to deepen the problem. This dog whistling stuff, especially around racism, this has been going on for over 50 years. Yeah. This arose as a way to respond to defang the civil rights movement. It arose as a way to take advantage of white anxiety over the civil rights movement. So we're talking Richard Nixon in 68, Barry Goldwater in 64, Richard Nixon 68, Nixon winning in a landslide 72, Reagan 1980, right on up to Donald Trump. This has been used over and over and over again. And so the question becomes like, good God, why can't we solve this? Why can't we respond effectively to it? Yeah. Because dog whistle politics has this third element to it. So we say, okay, dog whistling is stoking ugly racial hatreds. in a way that allows you to proclaim your innocence. So let's take a phrase like immigrants are poisoning the blood of the country, right? So it's like super ugly and it triggers all these ugly stereotypes. Then someone turns around and says that's the language of fascism, that's the language of racist hatred. And then Donald Trump turns around and his supporters turn around and say, we're just worried about our borders. We just want to get control of immigration. This has nothing to do with race at all. We've seen those two steps. Here's the third step, and Trump really leans into it, although this next move is something that goes all the way back to the 60s. Trump turns around and he says, I'm the least racist person there is. You all, my supporters, you're not racist either. But you see what's happening? Those elites and those racial justice folks and the woke mob, they're accusing us of being racist. And you know what? That's racist against us. The only reason they think we're racist is because we're white. They're attacking us. We're the victims. We're the true victims of racism in the country right now. So that's the move. 1, 2, 3. Punch race into the conversation. Number 2, deny that that's what you're doing. Number 3, turn around and say, hey, you've accused me of racism. You're the real racist. Or to give an example from the 60s, George Wallace, one of the biggest dog whistle politicians out there. I mean, George Wallace, right? He's the guy standing in the schoolhouse door, segregation today, tomorrow, forever. Well, he figures out you can't be that open, that ugly. So he begins to talk about states' rights. Like, no, this isn't about maintaining the social and legal oppression of African Americans, their humiliation and degradation. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about excessive federal meddling in state authority, right? He starts using that language and people are like, come on, dude, you called for segregation forever. We know that you are campaigning on a theme of continued white supremacy. And he turned around and he said, you know who the biggest bigots in the world are? They're the ones who accuse others of being bigots. And that's the move that Trump is deploying. Now, what happens? Because of that third move, just calling these folks bigots, just saying, hey, you're being racist. Hey, you're being a fascist. Hey, you're using the language of Hitler. It backfires. Because the language is coded. It allows plausible deniability. They get to say, whoa, I'm just talking about immigration, or I'm just talking about welfare, or I'm just talking about our culture. I'm just talking about hard work. And you turn around and you call me a fascist. You call me a racist. You call me a sexist. You're not just insulting me, this is Donald Trump. You're insulting all of my base. Well, I'm here to defend them. Right? And it backfires.
So what are we to do with this formula? You've got it down. It's literally to a science. Punch race into the conversation, deny that that's what you did, and accuse the accusers of actually being the real racists. I don't know that most Americans have the racial intellect, and I don't mean that to be disparaging. I mean, we don't have enough capacity to have basic conversations on racism 101. It makes sense to me that most of us are failing the challenge to respond to this in any meaningful way.
Yeah, that's such a great comment. So I published my book Dog Whistle Politics in 2014, and then sort of, so I was writing it in the midst of the Obama administration, and then Trump wins, and and I was saying to people at the time, there is an antidote to this. There is a way to defeat this. I was talking in particular to unions. And unions came back and said, we need evidence. So I teamed up with communication specialists and with pollsters, ran a bunch of focus groups, did a bunch of message testing, and we did come up with a message that works really well. And again, I'm going to hold that for a second. I'll tell you what it is.
The suspense.
I know the suspense. I suspense. But listen, I want to pick up. I want to pick up on something you just said that's so important. We lack a basic literacy in race about racism in this country. And it's an awful lot to ask average voters to have a very sophisticated conception of racism. I do think it's reasonable to ask political elites and media elites to have a basic literacy in racism. So I just wanted to put a pin in that. We can come back to it. I think that that's one of the huge challenges. It's one of the big hurdles we face, is that so much of the center and center left in this country is dominated by white people who have put very little sort of formal effort into studying race and racism. And so they themselves are operating on a really impoverished, with a really impoverished understanding of race. And so it makes it hard for them to understand the way in which race is the biggest single threat to American democracy. It is the biggest single threat, or let me put it, let me sharpen this. Anti-Black racism. Understanding that to encompass the sort of correlates of racism against Latinos and Asians, Native Americans, but anti-Black racism is the single biggest threat to American democracy and to the well-being of every person in this country, including every white family, right now in 2024.
I'm in complete agreement with you on that. But you tease out for us the difference between and why the sharpening was necessary, because you got me already. I'm 1,000.
The sharpening is necessary because a lot of so what the right is doing is the right is pushing an understanding of racism that is really sort of an ethnic conception of racism. What the right is doing, and has been since the 1970s, is saying, you know, here's the deal in America. We're all minorities. Even white people aren't really white people. They're Italian, they're Polish, they're Irish, they're Jewish, they're WASPs. There's really, you know, to use a famous phrase from the decision severely undercutting affirmative action in 1978, the Bakke decision, we're really a nation of minorities. And what does that mean, this ethnic conception of race? It means there is no dominant group. Whites don't even exist anymore. Instead, there's just a whole pile of ethnic minorities who all discriminate against each other at various times and in various ways. And what this does is it completely erases a white over Black hierarchy from our understanding of racism. And instead it suggests that the problem of racism is not structural, it's not historical, it's not rooted in colonialism and slavery and Native American dispossession, in the structures of our society built on settler colonialism. It's none of that. It's just that groups tend to discriminate against each other, right? And so that understanding of racism has moved from the right to the center. And now a lot of people, if you say, if I say to people, the problem of this country is racism, half the audience is going to be like, yeah, I know, because there's a lot of racism against people of color. There's a lot of racism against white people. There's just a lot of racism out there, right? And it's this ethnic version, right, where we're all just groups hating on each other. So I want to be super clear. The problem of racism is not groups hating on each other. The problem of racism is anti-Black racism, a phrase that I'm using to try and capture this idea of a white over non-white hierarchy that is foundational to this country and fundamental to its current existence and its current arrangements. That's the racism, this white over non-white racism that truly threatens us. And yes, groups hating on each other, minor though, minor compared to this basic dynamic of white over non-white, which is precisely what a term like Make America Great Again seeks to trigger.
Wow. And now, in light of everything that you said, I'm mindful of the fact that they've gone from being on the defense to the extent they ever were, to now they're on the offense. Now, anti-white racism, you know, you can't have any program that focuses on a group that doesn't include white men. You can't have a Fearless Fund, a fund started by Black women to support Black women, because that violates the white person's right to access to that funding. You can't have programs designed to stop Black and Indigenous women from dying in childbirth, because because that focus means that white people being excluded, that's the real racism. So they've not only gone from normalizing your definition of dog whistle politics, which I think is phenomenal, but now they're on the offense and they're weaponizing this lack of intellectual curiosity and depth when it comes to issues of racism. They've now weaponized it. So now the white community has a fearless leader who is now a group of them who are now fighting to make sure that white Americans can get access to all the things, despite the fact that focusing on the needs of the specific racial minority groups has been at the result of those groups being excluded from being able to participate in the body politic generally. They're very good at this, Professor
Totally.
Lopez.
Totally. They're very good at it for a couple of reasons. One is because, and I'm going to come back to this and develop this at length. One is because this is pure strategy, is pure rhetoric. They're not trying to tell the truth about who they are, what their ideals are, what they're trying to achieve. When I say they, I mean like Barry Goldwater, Richard Nixon, but I also mean the think tanks that have sprung up to support these right-wing demagogic politicians, Heritage Foundation, Manhattan Institute. They're not trying to tell us who they really are and what they want, because who they really are and what they want is something that very, very few Americans would support. What they really want is a return to rule by and for the rich. This is the billionaire class. They want to roll back a government that actually helps working people. They want to reduce taxes on the very rich. They want to reduce regulation on the way they run the marketplace so that consumer fraud becomes rampant. They want to roll back, or they want to control regulation of the workplace so that the workplace is a place of maximum profit, but minimum protections for workers and minimum pay for workers, right? Like that, let me sharpen this. There is a class war agenda being promoted right now, but they don't want to say that. So it's cynical strategy, right? And once you say to yourself, I'm engaged in a cynical strategy, you're free to like lie with abandon, right? You're not constrained by, I really want to say something that is true and that connects with people and that, right? Like, no, you can lie with abandon. So that's a big advantage. And the other big advantage is if you're engaged in class war on the billionaire side, you have billions to draw on. These are very, very well resourced people. They have a lot of money. They can hire consultants. They can hire communication specialists. They can run focus groups. Like I managed to like imitate that on the tiniest scale. And I think sort of on the center left side, there's an effort to kind of do this, but there's just not that much money compared to the money that's available to craft the sort of lies that will mobilize people. And I want to just put in a plug really quickly for an article that just appeared in the New York Times. There's an expose on the campaign against diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Which just right there, you're like, wait a minute, you guys are demonizing diversity, equity, and inclusion? And yeah, they are, and they're winning that battle. New York Times just a few days ago ran an expose on that. And they had this phrase in there. They got access to the emails from a lot of the people orchestrating this campaign. And they had in there this phrase that just like, bam, right between the eyes. It's a couple of folks talking about how they were going after wokeism, they were going after critical race theory, but they felt that that was too narrow and too limited a success, that they really wanted to expand it to go after diversity and equity and inclusion. And so one of them says to another, hey, you know, our earlier phrasing on wokeism, that was just boob bait for the bubbas. Boob bait for the bubbas. And it so crystallizes what's happening. First, this is strategy. They know they are manipulating their supporters. Second, they don't even like their supporters. they're the ones who have a condescending, demeaning view of their supporters.
Mm.
Third, this is all sorts of social hatreds. This is racism, because we're talking about going after wokeism and critical race theory, but it's also sexism, the sexism of that imagery. It's homophobia, it's transphobia. They don't care. They just want to weaponize these social hatreds and promote them and stoke them. And fourth, this is a conversation between people who are working at well-funded foundations, foundations funded by dark money, whose
Right.
agenda is to promote quote unquote a free economy, or to promote liberty. And what do they mean? They mean reducing the size of government, slashing taxes for the rich, controlling regulation of the marketplace and of the workplace, gutting environmental laws, right? Like there was so much in that one story that helps us understand dog whistle politics is class war. It's winning because it is carefully, strategically crafting these lies designed to turn us against each other.
Mm.
And when we fight and fear our neighbors, we lose sight of the fact that the billionaires are more and more controlling our government and our economy.
There it is. Now, I don't consider myself a part of the media elite. That some might
Not
disagree.
yet, not yet, but, but
Some might
on the
disagree.
cusp.
I'm certainly not of the upper class at all. I have a very solid understanding of racial politics in history in this nation. What should I be doing? What should people who are, you mentioned the media elite, it may not be within the purview of the masses, but certainly those who are considered the political elite and the media elite, there are things we can do to effectively combat this. We only have a minute or two left. I've already told my team, you got to have them come back because I want to unpack so many of the things. I have notes, sir. I took notes. I always take notes, but I took notes. I want to know, how do I, in the small capacity that I have, what should I be doing to help combat this effectively? What did you see in that focus study that you were able to do that said, no, there's a solution to this? We may not know the solution, but there is a solution there. How do we move forward?
So here's the solution, and here's the solution as it works for average voters, and it works incredibly well. Start naming racism as a divide and conquer class war tactic that threatens all of us, whether we're black, brown, yellow, or white. Voters get it immediately. Here's the most popular, most convincing political message out there, and I know this through several rounds of testing. It's a message that says, we're all in this together. Some people are trying to divide us. They're doing so that they can rig the rules for themselves and their wealthy donors. When we reject division and come together, we can make this a country in which every racial group can thrive. That is, notice what I'm doing. I'm moving away from just saying, hey, that's racism, to saying, this is racism as class war. When we defeat the racism, we can take care of our own families, even if our families are white. And this is that point. We're saying to voters, you know what the biggest threat in your life is? It's not your neighbor. It's the lying politician who tells you your neighbor's a threat. But the real threat's that politician and the dark money that's behind them, right? So it's a very simple message. This is divide and conquer. We need to unite and build. It's a very simple message. It lands, it resonates with voters. But let me switch now to you, Lurie, and to others. Especially, I mean, I think you're doing an amazing job, right? Because you're really deepening the public's understanding of how racism is working. But there's a way in which those of us on the sort of anti-racism side have to lean into a deeper, more radical conception of racism that we've largely lost, in part because of the civil rights movement. It is a conception of racism that goes back to people like Du Bois, that goes back to people like Bayard Rustin, Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta. I think Martin Luther King came here late in his life. It is a conception of racism which sees racism as inseparable from, and in some ways, as the grease that eases capitalism. We need to fuse our conversations of racism and capitalism. We need to deepen that analysis. We need to see the way in which racism has been central to the functioning of capitalism, and it is central to its functioning right now. Not just Native American dispossession and slavery. The last 50 years, the war on the most effective regulation of capitalism. So think about New Deal, Great Society. What was that? That was a significant tempering of capitalism so that it was regulated and its enormous profits were redistributed. The last 50 years have been an unwinding of that regulation, an unwinding of that redistribution, a shifting of capitalism back into unfettered freebooting capitalism that raids society for the benefit of the very few. And when I say, and I just want to emphasize this, do not misunderstand me as saying class is more fundamental. We need to talk about capitalism. Racism's distracting. I know a lot of people, frankly, a lot of Bernie supporters who are going to understand these comments that way. That's an enormous mistake. This is a claim that in the United States in particular, but frankly, globally, racism and capitalism are inseparable. Group hierarchy and capitalism are inseparable as reinforcing social systems. And to really meet the emergencies of the current moment, we need to start thinking about all sorts of social hierarchies, racism and sexism in particular, as deeply embedded in capitalism, as justifying it, as facilitating it, as a source of divide and conquer that allows the very rich to turn us against each other rather than joining forces against the very rich to make sure that society works for all of us.
I'm reminded in hearing you speak about what was happening in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1897, leading up into the 1898 election. You had this fusion group that had for multiple elections been working together saying, listen, I'm formerly enslaved. You are a poor white farmer. We got a heck of a lot more in common together, and our issues are connected than you do with the wealthy class that's trying to get you to vote against me out of a racial connotation. This is going to be very important. And I think that I'm a little hopeful. I'm a little more hopeful right now, which is exciting because I don't often end these conversations more hopeful. I would love to, but my team is already going to reach out to you to have you come back because we're at the end of our show, but I want to unpack this connection between racism as a divide and conquer class war tactic. And I think if we can master that language in my non-media elite role, I will do the best that I can. I think that is something that is going to help a lot more people figure out how we can grapple with this very successful multi-part plan or multi-part system of dog whistle politics. Professor Lopez, I am so grateful for you giving us some time today to really help lay the foundation for what we are going to have to build on throughout the rest of this year. And I do hope we can get you to come back because, brother, when I tell you I have notes, sir, multiple sides of the paper, I am not kidding. How can people follow you? We'll be tweeting out links to the books that you've put out and some of the articles. You've got some great videos on YouTube as well. What's the best way for people to connect with you and your scholarship beyond these airwaves?
I think start with the videos. So just to tell your audience a little bit more about them, Race Class Academy, raceclassacademy.com. And the idea there is a series of 12 videos just trying to lay this analysis out. You know, if you're hardcore, you could watch all 12 in under 30 minutes. And then from there, build on that knowledge. And then, of course, the books and my personal website and whatnot. But I really urge people, start with Race Class Academy and then share it.
Yes, we are going to unpack this year. Race Class Academy is about to be go-to listening and viewing for a lot of people in Urban View. Professor Lopez, it has truly been a pleasure having you here. You've given us a lot to think about. I'm seeing the comments. Really grateful for you being here and hope we can get you to come back to help us unpack more.